What is up, everybody? Corey Hughes Bloody History. We're back. So now that we've run through the Harvey and Lee stuff, for now, a lot of the Harvey and Lee stuff is going to end up being put on a shelf until it goes into my next book. My next book will be on the unbelievable story of Harvey Lee Oswald. Now, honestly, I have some things in the works, and I'm probably not going to be able to get to that for a little bit. So we're going to shelve that. And we're going to continue on with the testimony of Lillian Murret today because she's a total lying fucking bitch. And she was in on the dual Oswald scheme. And so one thing that's been brought to my attention, which is really pissing me off, is that I've gone through, I don't even know how many testimonies, and most of them I got through History Matters, as they were supposed to be transcripts of the Warren Commission, but they've been fucking edited, right? This has been pointed out to me by Diana Thomas that these are all edited. So unfortunately, who the hell knows how much I've missed because I read edited freaking testimonies, right? So never again. We'll be going directly to the original old school Warren Commission volumes that were scanned in by the government. And believe it or not, they're the most complete. Just in spending 5 minutes looking over Lillian Murret's testimony, you can tell there's been a sentence here, a sentence there, deleted or removed. I don't know, nothing seemingly relevant, but you never know. So we're going to continue on from here. So she's talking to Mr. Jenner, the lawyer for the Warren Commission, and we're at the point where she's testifying that basically Marguerite went off and said she's going to be gone and she's not going to talk to anybody. And then Lillian says she then gets a call around April or May of 63 from Lee. She means Harvey. Lee is not in the picture at this point anymore. And so her testimony is beyond problematic. She contradicts herself all over the place. And then we have the photograph of her and Marilyn Murret and allegedly Lee Oswald at 757 French Street. Unknown date taken, but that picture, if that is Lee, which it's not, it would totally contradict the timing of when she said she last saw Lee and then when she spoke to him here in April or May of 63. So she's lying about this. And then again, that man in that picture is not Lee. Lee is not a warm and fuzzy, give you a hug kind of person ever. In that picture, he has his arm around around Lillian Murret. And then again, when you look at his hairline, it matches identically the hairline of the photograph from Oswald or Harvey Oswald at Beauregard. So there's a major obfuscation here. I don't know what the hell's going on. But no one is who they say they are. Lee is in multiple places at once because one of the Murret children most certainly was using the name Lee Oswald at some point. I think some of the pictures of Lee that were told are Lee are not Lee for sure. Either of them, Lee or Harvey. And that I believe that John Eugene Murret was most certainly involved in this scheme. Now, I'll admit this needs further research. Hopefully another researcher will pick up where I left off. But she's a liar. Lillian Murret's a liar. She was clearly in on this. I have her flight records to Canada and to Kinley Air Force Base in Bermuda and to Cuba. I have a Social Security action in Texas at some undisclosed time. And so, yeah, these are problematic for the official story and for Lillian's understanding of what's happening with Marguerite and Lee. So, Mr. Jenner says this was in May or April of 63, right? Yes. Just about a year ago, yes? Yes. Do you remember whether it was May or April? Which month it was? It was way after Easter, I know that. It was possibly the week after Easter. All right. Now he arrived at your home, is that right? Yes, he took the streetcar and bus, I suppose, to be coming to my house, and he came out to the house, and he was very poorly dressed. How was he dressed? He had on just a sport shirt and a very poorly pair of pants. Did he have on a suit coat? A suit coat? Yes. No, he didn't. Was your husband home? No. Was anybody other than you home? No. What luggage did he have when he arrived at your home? I don't think he came over with anything to the house. He could have had one of these bags, when he came to my home from the bus station. Now, this is particularly important to us. Let me take you back now just a year ago. And tell me, first of all, is your recollection of whether he had any luggage with him when he arrived at your house? Well, I asked him over the telephone where he was, and he said he was at the bus station. And when I asked him to come out, he came right out. And when he came into my house, I think he was only carrying just a little handbag, they call it. Okay, let me pause right here because we have another problem. We have statements of witnesses who said that Oswald, when he got to New Orleans, went door to door on French Street, knocking on the door, trying to figure out which house was the Murret house. We have witnesses to this. We have witness statements in the FBI to this. So this story here contradicts that story. What exactly happened there? Why would Oswald come to town and then go knocking door to door until he found the house, particularly if it was a house that he spent years in growing up, right? Doesn't make any sense. And this story here by Lillian and Murret doesn't do anything to clarify that issue whatsoever. What color was it? Possibly brown. Brown? I think so. What kind of material was it made of? What the handbag was made of? Yes. I think it was just cloth. A cloth bag, yes. Did he have it in just one hand? Yes. It was not a marine duffel bag or anything like that. Oh, no. It wasn't too large then? No, it was small. The witness indicates about 14 inches. It was just an ordinary bag like athletes used to put their clothes in or something like that. And that's all he had on that occasion. Are you sure of that? When he arrived at the house, yes, sir. But he had things over at the bus station. I see. He had a duffel bag and some boxes over there, I know. How do you know that? How do I know that? Yes, because I asked Mr. Murret to go over to the bus station and pick up all the stuff and bring it back to the house, which he did, and they put it in the garage. He wanted to leave it there until he found an apartment. And did Mr. Murret go to the bus station with Lee? Yes. That evening? Yes. In your automobile? Yes. And he picked up the materials at the bus station and other packages, is that right? Yes. Were you home when they came back from the bus station? I might have been inside. I didn't go into the garage, if that's what you mean, but there's where you put the things in the garage. Did you see anything in the garage eventually? Well, I saw a duffel bag out there, and I saw ordinary cardboard boxes with things in them, and I don't know what was in anything. It had U.S. Marine written over it. Over the duffel bag. Yes, sir. How many duffel bags were there? Quite a few, I think. More than 2 duffel bags? I could be wrong, but I think there were more. Would you say that there were at least 2 duffel bags and that there could have been more than 2? Yes. I think that some of the boxes must have contained baby clothes and things like that. And in fact, I was wondering how in the world he got all that stuff on the bus. I never did ask him, but he really had a load of stuff with him. It was all there at the bus station, though. Did he have any long packages with him? I wouldn't know that. Do you mean any visible long packages? Yes. I didn't see any. These cardboard boxes, were they ordinary cardboard boxes that a person would pack things in? Yes, I guess there were clothes in those. Did he have any long flat packages with him? I didn't see any. Did you ever see a package wrapped in unbroken or tan wrapping paper? I don't think. Like I said, I knew there were all kinds of things back in there, all bunched up more or less. Everything was in such a little space back there, but it was all together. And my washing machine is out there, but I never one time pried into or disarrayed any of that stuff or anything like that. I figured that wasn't any of my business. Did you see any package that stood up on end at all? I didn't see any like that, no. Anything that looked like, say, a tent pole, long and hard? No, I didn't see anything that looked like that. There were just some boxes and duffel bags and bundles that I saw, and I do know one time he was back there when I was back there, and he pulled out a Russian cap that they wear in Russia, and boots, and these leather Russian boots. That's all I saw. Did the Russian cap have any insignia on it or anything like that? Yes, the Russian cap had fur on it, like the Russians wear in cold weather. Did it have an insignia on it, or a red star, or a hammer and sickle, or anything like that? No, not that I saw. What struck me as odd was that Lee didn't seem to have anything to wear. I told him, Lee, you don't look too presentable. I'm going to buy you some clothes. My boys were all big, all over 6 feet. Ooh, that could be important here. My boys were all big, all over 6 feet. So nothing they had would fit Lee. So he said no, that he had a lot of things, but that they were all packed. He said that's all right, but all he had on at the time was a T-shirt and pants. And I think he had only about 2 T-shirts with him. You say he had no suit coat? No, and only 1 pair of shoes. I even offered to buy him a pair of shoes, and he said no, that he had some shoes packed away. Did he ever get them out? No, he didn't get them out. He said he just wanted to put up there for a few days, you see, because he was trying to find a job, he told me. And then he said that he would send for Marina, his wife, and the child, and I asked him to tell us what she looks like, to describe her. And he said, well, she's just like any other American housewife. She wears shorts and so forth, and like any other American housewife. And he said that he would have to have a newspaper so he could scan all the want ads and try to find himself a job. And so every morning he would get up and go through the newspaper looking for a job, and he would go out every morning with his newspaper. He wouldn't come back until the afternoon, until supper time. I had supper anywhere from 5:30 to 6 o'clock, and he was there on time every day for supper, and after supper he didn't leave the house. He would sit down about 6:30 or 7 o'clock and look at some television programs, and then would go right to bed. He did that every day while he was at the house. And so then on the first Sunday he was there, we were talking about relatives, and he said to me, "Do you know anything about the Oswalds?" And I said, "No." I said, "I didn't." I said, "I don't know any of them other than your father. And I saw your uncle one time." I said, "I don't know anything about the family. I don't know them." So he said, "Well, I don't know any of my relatives." He said, "You're the only one I know." This is extremely, extremely important, guys. This is really important. So, the reason that this is so important is because besides the knocking on the door-to-door thing, like I already told you about, that we have witnesses to that she's not being upfront about, we also have Oswald going through the phone book and calling all of the Oswalds in the phone book looking for family. Specifically, he was looking for Harvey Oswald, the uncle, Robert's brother, older brother Harvey, who I'm convinced fathered one, if not both, of the Oswalds. Period. The light gray eyes and the height and all that stuff, this doesn't match Robert at all. So Oswald went through the phone book and got a hold of, which Oswald was it? It wasn't Hattie Oswald. It was Hazel Oswald. He gets a hold of Hazel Oswald and has a long conversation with her. And he goes over there, and she ends up giving him a picture of his father, which I think is the only picture we actually have of him, if that's even really him. That picture just looks suspicious to me. So the fact that he's reaching out for his family is important. He doesn't know any of them. But see, the thing is, Lee, growing up, knew all of them. Well, not the Oswalds. He knew all the Murrets. He knew the whole family of Murrets. But here he's saying he doesn't know him. Because he doesn't. Because it's not Lee Oswald. It's Harvey Oswald. Now, this was on a Sunday, and Lee had come to my house on a Monday. Now that he didn't tell me that was on Sunday, he must have gone to the cemetery where his father was buried. That's right at the end of Lakeview Line where I live. He went to the cemetery. I guess he went to ask the person in charge about the grave. Anyway, he found it, and while he was there, he saw someone who knew the Oswalds. I didn't get whether she was related or not, but they got to talking about the family or some way. I don't know what all they talked about, but anyway, Lee looked in the paper, and finally he found this job. I don't know where it was, but it was up on Rampart Street, and they wanted someone to letter. To do lettering work, yes. And so he called this man, and the man said, "Come out," and so on. And he went out there to see about a job. First, while he was waiting for the appointment time, he sat down and tried to letter, and well, it was a little sad because he couldn't letter as well as my next-door neighbor's 6-year-old child. But I didn't say anything. So when he got back, he said, "Well, I didn't get the job." He said, "They want someone who can letter, and I don't know how to do that." So that's when he got into the subject of Oswald's family again, and he sat down and took out the telephone book. He called all the Oswalds in the telephone book until he came to one person who was the right Oswald, and this was an elderly lady living in Metairie. She was the wife of one of the Oswalds, and so he told her he had a map. He always carried a map with him to find directions. If he wanted to go to a certain place, he would never ask you how to get there. He'd always take this map and mark the route out himself. So we went to see this lady, and she was the wife of one of the brothers in the Oswald family, and she told him that everybody was dead, I think, and she gave him a picture of his father, and she gave him some other pictures, and then she invited him back. She said that he said she was a very nice old lady and was very, very happy, but I don't think he ever went back to see her. So the next day, Monday, well, he went back to his job hunting, and he continued that way until one morning he saw this job with Riley Coffee Company. And he went down and applied, and he got the job, and he came home waving the newspaper, and he grabbed me around the neck, and he even kissed me and said, I got it. He was quite happy that he had gotten work. Yes, I said, well, Lee, how much does it pay? And he said, well, it don't pay very much, but I will get along on it. I said, well, Lee, you're really not qualified to do anything too much. If you don't like this job, why don't you try to go back to school at nighttime and see if you can't learn a trade or whatever you think you can prepare yourself to do. And he said, no, I don't have to go back to school. I don't have to learn anything. I know everything. So that's the way it was. I couldn't tell him anymore. I had told him what I had thought he should do, but if he thought he was smart enough, then there was nothing else I could do. Did you get the impression when you were talking along these lines that he really believed he was that smart? He believed he was that smart, yes, sir. You don't think he was spoofing you? No, I really do think he thought he was that smart, and I don't think he envied anybody else. I thought he was very smart, and I don't think he envied anyone else because he thought he knew it all, I guess. He didn't think he had to have a profession or anything. He didn't even know when he left his job. Well, before we get to that, while he was living with you, did he read while he was home at night? Did he read? Yes. No. He didn't read any books. You see, he went out all day. He would get up and leave early in the morning. He wouldn't eat any breakfast. I would try to fix him an egg and bacon or something like that, but he didn't want to eat anything for breakfast, and he wouldn't take a thing. We always eat a big breakfast in our family, but he wouldn't eat a thing. He would just get dressed and go out with his newspaper to look for a job and come home for supper time. And then he would sit around for a while and watch television and then go to bed. And he followed that same pattern all the while he was with us until he got this job with the Riley Coffee Company. Did he ever talk to you about Russia during that time, his life in Russia and how he felt about it? No, the only thing he spoke about was the relatives. He said in Russia, all the relatives knew one another, and he said they all lived together. And if he said one comes in and he wants to stay overnight and that they will put him up in a corner or help him out with clothes and so forth. But of course, he worked in a factory while he was over there. Did he tell you that? Well, he did tell me he worked in a factory and he did work around the machinery, but that's all he told me about. And that's when he got this job at the Riley Coffee Company and started to work there. He said, well, that was no different than any other factory in Russia. I said, well, what do you do? What do you mean by that? He said, well, the equipment was just as bad as the machines, and the work conditions were not any different from Russia. But that's all he would say about it. We didn't talk too much about it. Do you mean he inferred that the machinery at the Riley Coffee Company was outdated as compared with the machinery in Russia? Yes, as compared with the machinery in Russia. He said, you had to work hard. He said they work you hard at the plant. Did he say anything about his reaction to Russia? No, he never spoke about Russia that way. He would only talk when you asked him a question, that's all. He would never tell you anything. When he first came in and stayed with us, I asked him a few things about Russia, but he wouldn't talk much about it. He never expressed an opinion about Russia at all. About all he would say was that they were just about like any other people. That's all he would say. He didn't talk then about his views on the Russian government. No, not to me. There was no time, really. The way things were, like I said, he would come home in time for supper and then watch a little television and go to bed. He never spoke anything. He never spoke about anything. Did he ever discuss his life in the Marines with you? No, he never talked about that either. He did say that he was wanting to get out of Russia so that he could bring his wife and child over to this country. And he said the immigration department loaned him $365 and some odd cents to use to get out of Russia. And he said he worked for in Dallas or Fort Worth for some photographer there. And one of those places, I forget which, but he did say he worked until he paid it all back and said, if you made that much money at that job, why did you let that go? And he said, well, they didn't want a third man on the job or something like that. They didn't want a third man on the job. That's what he said, and they didn't want a third man on the job. And you say that was in Dallas when he worked for this photographer. I'm talking about the Jagger Chow Stovall. He ended up leaving because a coworker ratted him out for being a communist. Mrs. Murret, I think it was Dallas that he said. Yes, it was either Dallas or Fort Worth. I think it was Dallas. He said he liked the job all right, but he said that they let him go because they didn't want a third man. Now, I don't know if that's a true story or not. So when he came here to look for a job and said that he found a job, that he would have Marina and the child come over here. I think that before that time, Marina had called but hadn't found anything then. So when he called and told her he had this job, she must have been all packed and everything because they got here so quick. Well, did you hear him talk to her over the telephone? Well, he spoke in Russian, in the Russian language. Did you say anything to him about that? Did I say anything to him speaking to her in Russian? Yes. No, I didn't, but I wonder about that. Here was a man speaking in Russian who was an American. He had a wife over in this country for a year and a half. He said, and I did wonder why he didn't try to teach her English. But anyway, he called her after he got the job, and he got right off the phone and said, I'm going out to look for an apartment. So sure enough, he found an apartment the very first day, and he came back and said, I found an apartment, and I think it was $65 a month. And he said the rent was... Then he told me about Mrs. Payne, who he said had been very nice to Marina, who was going to bring Marina on down with the baby. And he said, I would like to get a very nice apartment with an extra room, so if Mrs. Payne wanted to stay with us a few days, we will have a place for her to stay. And I wondered about that too, renting an expensive apartment like that he had in mind, but apartments were hard to find about that time, and I told him, if you have a nice apartment, I think you'd better keep it, because it's just temporary. And it was a nice apartment, or at least that's what he told me. He said, you know how I get to the apartment? And I said, no, I don't. He said, well, I'll tell you. I rode around a while, and I decided to stop at Myrtle's house. That's Myrtle Evans. Yes, sir. Remember, Myrtle Evans was the landlord at 1452 and 1454 St. Mary, right? At the time in 52, 10 years earlier, when it was not Myrtle Evans living at the fucking the 1910 Britannia, okay? So at 1910 Britannia, this is where she's living. This is where Myrtle Evans is living, and then they end up renting a place to the Oswalds in May of 1954, right? This is a big problem. We've talked about this ad nauseum. We have the 4 or 5 month gap from January to May where the real Lee Oswald and his mother are fucking incognito, right? But we can say with certainty Harvey Oswald was living at 126 Exchange Place. That's who this Myrtle Evans is. So he stops at Myrtle Evans' house, and Myrtle doesn't recognize him because she never met the fucking guy. She met Lee Oswald, not Harvey Oswald. And this is Harvey Oswald showing up at her house, right? So Harvey, but see, this is what he's doing. He's just stepping into the shoes of his other brother, right? This is who that is. I'm sorry, they're brothers at this point. It's inevitable they're brothers. And I fucking promise you Harvey Oswald is the father of one of them. So can we ever prove this? Probably not. We have to do some major fucking exhumations, right? We have to go around and break into all these fucking graves and steal some DNA and then get it all tested, right? That's what we'd have to do. So, Myrtle Evans. Yes, sir. All right, go ahead. Well, he said he stopped at Myrtle's house and went up to the door, and she came to the door, but she didn't recognize him. She didn't recognize Lee. He was telling you this, is that right? Yes, he told me how he did that, and he said he asked Myrtle, did she have an apartment, that he was looking for an apartment for his wife and baby who were coming from Texas. And so Myrtle said, well, I'm sorry, but the only apartment I have is on the second floor, and I don't think that would be good, for your wife. Lee said to her, do you know who I am? She said, no. He said, I'm Lee Oswald. She said, well, don't tell me. Lee, I would never have recognized you because it's not the same guy. She said, the last I heard from your aunt, she told me you were in Russia because I did see Myrtle one day and she knew me. And see, that's a contradiction too, because Lillian's not supposed to know anything until he shows up after the fucking going to Russia. And she didn't know he went to Russia, right? That's how it's supposed to have gone. But Lillian Murret can't keep her fucking story straight because she knew everything. She's the heart of this thing. The last I heard from you, from your aunt, she told me you were in Russia because I did see Myrtle one day and she knew me. I never was what you would call a friend of Myrtle, but of course she knew who I was because we just got to know each other at a card party where I was working at Jesuits. And she asked about Lee at that time, and I told her that Lee had defected to Russia. She told Lee that the last time she had heard of him, he was in Russia, and he said, well, I'm back and I'm married to a Russian girl. So Myrtle says, well, come on in, Lee. And I think she gave Lee some lunch, and then she decided to help him find an apartment. She told him, we're not going to a real estate office because prices are high, and I know because I manage apartments myself. So we'll just ride in and out into these streets and see what we can find. They got in her car and went up riding on Magazine Street, and there was a sign on a house apartment for rent. So they went and knocked and inquired about the apartment, and the lady said how much it was, and it was very clean with a new stove and a new refrigerator, and it was newly wallpapered, and it had a floor furnace and a large living room and a bedroom and a bath connecting the bedroom and another room in the kitchen and a small front porch and a closed-in yard. And so Myrtle said to Lee, Lee, this is great. You better take this place. Lee said, well, I don't know. The ceilings are high, and Marina doesn't like high ceilings. But she said, well, I think you'd better get this place because it's all you can afford. And he said he would take it. But I don't think Marina ever liked high ceilings. But anyway, after he called Marina, then they came in on Saturday. Excuse me for interrupting. But before we get them coming in, did he ever say anything to you as to why he left Russia? Did he say why he left Russia? Yes. He never mentioned it. Why? No, sir. I was always under the impression he was just tired of being over there and wanted to come back. We were trying to find out how in the world he got out with a Russian wife. And I asked him the question, and he told me that immigration had loaned him the money and said Marina's uncle had helped him get him out, and that he was a retired army general. Did you have the impression that he was never quite satisfied with anything when he was in Russia, that he was over there but he didn't like it? Well, he didn't say that to me. All right, now that you say Marina then came back to New Orleans after he had a call and said that he had found a job, is that right? Yes, she came with Mrs. Payne. Did Mrs. Payne drive her? Yes, they came in Mrs. Payne's car. In fact, I think he got that apartment possibly on a Thursday at 4905 Magazine Street. Yes, sir, Thursday or Friday or whatever it was. That was the 9th of September, 1963. Is that right? I guess that was the date. Did Lee move in on Monday? No, Lee moved in right away on Saturday. In fact, he moved in on the 10th, I think, or the 9th. Anyway, after he got it, he moved himself in the next day. And when Marina came in on that Saturday, well, Saturday was the 7th, Sunday was the 8th, and Monday was the 9th of May. Oh, I'm looking at September. I'm sorry. Now, let's see. The 9th of May was a Thursday, and that's when he got the apartment, the 9th of May. He moved in the next day, is that right? Well, my fucking God, these people drive me up a fucking wall. Did you not just catch that? She just said it was fucking Saturday, and now she's saying it's Friday. These fucking people drive me fucking crazy. Jesus Christ. Keep your fucking story straight, bitch. You work for the CIA. How the fuck do you not keep your story straight? That's right. And he came back to my house that Saturday morning. That's the 11th. Yes, and Marina and Mrs. Payne were coming in on Saturday, and they arrived there about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, around that time. And then he took all the things that he had gone out in the garage over the apartment. Were you present when he did that? I went to see the apartment, but you were present when he took the things out of your garage. You mean in the garage? Yes. No, I wasn't. You didn't get any better look at all the things that he had in the garage than you had the first day when your husband brought the stuff from the bus station and it was put in the corner of the garage. No, I didn't. I was busy on the side of the house when he took all that stuff over to the apartment because we were all anxious, you see. And not all, but Marilyn and myself wanted to see the apartment. So inasmuch as we had to bring the things up there, he loaded the car. Your car? Yes, our car. Mr. Murret drove the car up there. Did you see them put the things in the car? No, but they did put everything in the car. Did you see them do that? No, but Mr. Murret helped. I knew he was doing that. He had to do that. I didn't do it. I just wanted to go over there that first day and see the apartment, so I was trying to finish up inside, and I just noticed that he was loading the car, and that's something else. The reason why Mr. Murret is considered such a gentleman. No woman in his presence ever picks up a package or anything like that. A woman never picks up a package in the presence of your husband? That's right, he always does it. So anyway, we brought Lee up to the apartment. He was so happy about the place. He thought it was the most beautiful place, and we thought it was nice too. But after he got everything out of the car, we just left. Did you see him taking the things out of the car and bringing them into the apartment? Yes, but we didn't help them. Was your husband helping to unload the car? Oh, yes. He was taking the things out himself. You saw him do that? Oh, yes. And they had a lot of locker space in that apartment. And Lee was putting in everything in this one big locker, I think. Did your husband have any luggage? Luggage? Yes. Yes, I had some suitcases. He had some suitcases? Yes, they looked at like Marina's suitcase for one because he didn't come into my house with any suitcase. Like I said, he just had that little bag with him. In fact, he only had maybe 2 pairs of socks and 2 T-shirts and 2 pairs of pants and nothing else. But you did see a suitcase or more than one suitcase in the garage, is that right? I think I did. I think he did have a suitcase in the garage or maybe 2. Yes, sir, I seem to remember those. Do you have a ready recollection of that? Yes, I do. I think if I remember right that I saw 2 suitcases there and that they were very nice suitcases. Of ordinary size, would you say? I think they were of ordinary size, yes, sir. Regular suitcases with the handle in the center, yes. Would you say they were straight-sided or oblong rather than square? Yes, just ordinary, regular clothing suitcases. About 28 inches long? Yes, but you didn't see any long package. No, I didn't. By long, I mean something in the neighborhood of 45 inches long or something like that. No, I didn't see anything like that. The only reason I noticed these suitcases was because my washing machine was in the garage, and I had to go out there and do my washing. And so the suitcases were standing up, sitting right next to one another, and there were boxes, a bunch of stuff. There were 2 suitcases, as far as you know? As far as I know, yes. Could there have been 3? There could have been. There could have been 4, I don't know. But your immediate recollection is that there were 2. Yes, that's right. There were at least 2 suitcases. But you didn't notice any wrapped package, any brown butcher paper, or regular delicatessen store paper. No, I didn't see anything like that. Like I said, though, when they put his things in the car, I was inside the house. Did your boys do any hunting? My boys? Yes. Well, the boy that's in the seminary, he had a little duck hunting occasionally, but that's about it. Did your boys ever have shotguns or rifles around your house? Oh, they had a small rifle in my locker. Do you know what that rifle looked like? Yes, just an ordinary rifle. It wasn't an expensive rifle. It could have been just a plain shotgun, I guess. In fact, I think I can remember back then, I think Gene, when he was duck hunting once, almost shot his hand off. Okay, so let me just clarify something here. So we have three brothers in the Murret family. You have Eugene and you have John Eugene, okay? But kind of they both went by fucking Gene at times. Your family involved in body double shit and they got kids with the same fucking name, right? So weird stuff here. So when she says, I think Gene, when he was shot, when he went duck hunting once, almost shot his hand off, I think she's talking about John Eugene, not Eugene Murret. But you don't think you see any packages in the house or any oblong out in the garage or anything that Lee had brought there? No, I didn't. Would you have any conception of what a rifle would look like when it's disassembled? What the barrel separated from the stock look like and so forth? No, I'm afraid I don't know anything about those rifles. All right, now we're on the 11th of September. Marina and Mrs. Payne have arrived at your home. Now will you tell me about that? Well, they arrived that afternoon. We brought Lee to the apartment that morning. Hang on a second. Stop the presses. So we were just talking about May. The May 10th was a fucking Friday. May 11th was a Saturday is when Marina came in. But now we're fast forwarding to the 11th of September. That's about, like, what the fuck's going on here? All right, so this is going to be a crucial date because we're talking 11th of September, 1963. What happened in early September 63? Well, we already know that Kerry Thornley is already back from Mexico City. He is living at David Ferry's house, being introduced as his roommate, Leon Oswald, and that Perry Russo will eventually see Kerry Thornley as Leon Oswald at the party, give or take, around September 20-something, right? So now we're talking September 11th, and Marina and Mrs. Payne have arrived at your home. Now, Lee, tell me about that. Well, they arrived that afternoon. We brought Lee to the apartment that morning, and Lee stayed at the apartment and came back during the day, and I said to Lee, well, suppose we go and buy some eggs to have your refrigerator stocked. So why is it, hold on a second. I was like, what the fuck is going on here, Mr. Jenner? You don't make mistakes like this. And the mistakes that you do make, you do on purpose. So what is this we're talking about, the 11th of September? No, we should be talking about May. The context of what she's saying has nothing to do with September. September is when they go back to Fort Worth. So, well, they arrived that afternoon. We brought Lee to the apartment that morning, and Lee stayed at the apartment and came back later during the day. And I said, Lee, well, suppose we have to go out and buy some eggs and have your refrigerator stocked. And he said, oh, don't worry about that. I'll get all that. I will have all that in. In other words, you couldn't help him. So then he came over to the house, and I planned on having lunch for Marina and Mrs. Payne, and they came in with the baby. So there was Mrs. Payne with her two children, Mr. Murret, and I guess Marilyn was in the back getting ready to go out. Marilyn's your daughter. Marilyn's my daughter, yes. She's a young lady who was here this morning with you. Yeah, she was getting ready to go out. She had an appointment with somebody. So they came in, and when I saw the baby, I forgot who else was there. I said, well, she's darling, you know, and the baby began to cry, and it cried and cried, and Marina took it to the kitchen and took care of her, and I think John was there. You mean your son, John? Yes, I think he was there. Had Lee arrived in the meantime? Yes, he had. Oh, yes, there he was. So finally, Lee said, well, let's go over to the apartment. And so they all got ready to leave, and Mr. Murret said that he would lead the way because they didn't know the way. He said, I will lead the way to this place. And so that's the way they went over there. Mr. Murret, my husband, took Lee with him. I think that's right. And Mrs. Payne drove the others over in her car. From the time Mrs. Payne drove off from your home, did you see Mrs. Payne anymore? No, sir. I never saw Mrs. Payne anymore. How soon after that did you see Lee and Marina and the baby? Well, you see, I don't drive myself, and I wanted them to come over, but they didn't have a car, and they didn't want my husband to go and get them, so it was 2 weeks before I saw them again. But one Saturday morning, about 2 weeks after they moved over there, Lee came over with Marina and the baby, which is a very long way. They had to come by the streetcar and bus, and it must have taken them a long time because they were living up on Magazine Street, and that's a pretty long way out to my house. From Canal Street up to the 4900 block of Magazine Street, that's 49 blocks, and then from my house to Canal, it must be 50 blocks. You mean it was 99 blocks distance from your house to their house? Right. All right, go ahead. Well, they made this trip by streetcar and bus, and we didn't even know they were coming, and they had a baby stroller and everything that belonged to them. This is Lee and Marina now. Yes, sir. That was 2 weeks later when they came to your house. Yes, and the baby. I was trying to make friends with the baby, and the baby was crying. Hang on a second. Stop the presses. All right, so I have to apologize because I'm reading these sentences and I'm still thinking about 5 minutes ago. So what we've determined from this testimony, it's not what we've determined. It's what Lillian Murret fucking said. So when Oswald goes off and he dips to Russia, she talks to Marguerite on the phone. And Marguerite says, I'm getting the fuck out of here. No one's going to know where I am. And she disappears. And then she says that she doesn't hear from Oswald till he shows up in fucking May of 63. Well, how the fuck is that possible when they had Thanksgiving dinner at her fucking house in November of 1962? How the fuck could she not have seen Marguerite or heard from Lee or anybody until May of 63 when Oswald was at her fucking house with the child in Thanksgiving of 60 fucking 2? You see what the fucking problem is here? Holy shit. Thanksgiving 62 never should have fucking happened as per her fucking testimony. Because we're talking May of 63. When she's saying this is the first time she's heard from Lee since before he went to the fucking Marines, which is nonsense because he showed up at her house one day in fatigues. Then he has Thanksgiving 62 at her house. But here we are, May 63, and she's saying this is the first time she's heard from Lee in years. What the fuck is going on here? Somebody please re-examine this and get back to me. All right, back to the testimony. Mr. Jenner says, that was 2 weeks later when they came by your house. Yes, and the baby. I was trying to make friends with the baby, and the baby was crying. It looked like the poor child never saw anyone before in her life. You had this feeling, did you? Yes, sir. You have reared some fine children, and you have grandchildren. Yes. I take it you have a knack with the babies and children. Yes. And you seem to have trouble with Lee's baby, with this baby. Yes, naturally. She'd never seen me before, and she didn't speak the English language. Marina made her understanding things in Russian, and so I took the baby outside with me to make friends, and the baby, she kept crying, and Marina kept telling her to look at me, and after a while, she made friends, and so then Lee decided that they would go out. I had a baby bed in the house, which I have had for all my children, and my daughter still uses the baby bed. So anyway, Marina and Lee wanted to go to the lakeside, which isn't too far from my home. What is the lakeside? Pontchartrain Lake. I guess that would be about 12 blocks from where I lived. About a mile and a half. About that, they decided to go crabbing, and so they got a little net and some crab bait, and the baby meantime went to sleep, so Lee left the baby with me in the crib, and they went to the lake. How did they get over there? Marilyn drove them. Your daughter Marilyn? Yes, she drove them out to the lake. Did Lee know how to drive a car? I don't think he did. I never saw him drive a car. You've never seen Lee behind the wheel of a car operating an automobile? Never. Did you ever hear that he did know how to drive an automobile, though? No, I don't think he did, because when they went to New York, when he went with his mother, she drove. She always drove. I never knew him to drive. Well, he was only fucking 12 then, so what are you talking about? Jesus Christ. So anyway, Marilyn took them out to Pontchartrain Beach, and they went crabbing. Is that right? That's right, and they didn't get any crabs, so on the way back, Marina was fussing at Lee in Russian, and Marilyn must have said, well, what is she saying, And Lee said, oh, she's just like a woman. She's no different. They are no different whether they come from Russia or France or someplace in Louisiana. They're all alike. They don't appreciate what you do for them. Marina was telling them that it was so stupid for them to be taking these crab nets, spending $1, I guess, it was for everything, when he could have gone to the French market and bought a dozen crabs for $1.25 or $1.50. She didn't see any sense in spending money and going out and not catching any crabs when you can go buy them at the French market. She missed the point where the boy liked to do that for the pleasure. She thought it was a bum idea. She told Lee it would be better just to go and buy some crabs and not to go through all the trouble. But anyway, they came back to the house and they stayed until about 10 o'clock. They ate supper and so forth, and the baby got a little friendlier. They played ball with the baby, and she came around a little bit, and I think Mr. Murret drove them home, and that was it. When they left, we told them that they could come by at any time, again, to let us know. And Lee said, no, we don't mind coming on the bus, but I don't think that they came around for a while after that. In the meantime, he must have lost his job at Riley Coffee Company. How'd you learn about that? Well, he told me. How did he come to tell you that? He called me again and said they just didn't need another person on the job. They had too many. Well, that seems to be a theme here. That seemed to be the only excuse he ever gave for losing a job. That was what he told you. Why? He had lost his position? Yes. That's why he said he lost in Texas. He asked me if he could use my telephone number because he would be out looking for a job, and if anybody would call, then he could call every afternoon to find out if anyone called, and I could give him the message, and he said he had his name in at the Louisiana Employment Service. The Louisiana Employment Service. Hey, Diana, I don't know if Louisiana Employment Service is everything we've ever talked about or heard about, so maybe Louisiana Employment Service might be something to dig into. Yes, is that the state? State employment, yes. All right, go ahead. During that time, he was getting state employment from Texas from that job when he first got here, because he got one of those checks when he was at my house, and then he was collecting state employment while he was off at this job here when he got out of work. So he was probably collecting both checks at the same time. I don't think he ever found a job, even though he supposedly was trying after that one. I mean, he said he was looking for a darkroom. A what? A photographer's job or something like that. So we went down to a place in Metairie, but he had to drive a truck for that job. And he told me he couldn't take the job because he didn't know how to drive. He did tell you that. Yes, sir. When was that? That was when he was out looking for a job. He told you he couldn't drive then. Yes, he said he couldn't take the job because he couldn't drive a truck. That would have been the summer of 63 now, is that right? Oh, yes, while he was here. I don't think he ever found any other job after that. Do you know how long he stayed on this job at the coffee plant? No, I don't. There's something else. Before he got this job at the coffee plant, I think he had Mr. Murret loan him $30 or maybe $40 to pay part of his house rent. But after he got that job at the coffee plant, he paid that back to Mr. Murret. I told him, if you need anything, Lee, ask for it. Because sometimes I felt guilty. I thought maybe when people like that need something, we should go ahead and get it for them. But then I told myself, well, no, since he's the type of person who is so independent. So I just stood back and waited to see if he could bring himself to come to me for something, because it was apparent that they needed a lot of things for him and Marina, but he never did except for that loan he made for my husband to pay part of the house rent. And the time he asked if we could put him up for a week while he looked for a job, but otherwise it seemed he didn't want anybody to do anything for him. I did ask him several times if there was anything we could do for them or get them, and he would say, no, we have everything. And then one time I offered him a spread and he said, no, we have everything. And the funny thing was, that day they came that Saturday, he said to me, Marina says we will take that spread now. We don't have a spread. So Marina must have bawled him out for not taking the spread in the first place. I mean, she must have thought he ought to have accepted it. So they went home with the spread after all. This was when they first came. Yes. So then he would call to find out if anybody had called from the employment agency. He had names in a private agency besides his state employment, and he did get several calls, and I gave him the message. And one time I remembered the man left his name, but I wouldn't remember that now. Might your husband remember that? No, my husband was never around when all this was going on. My husband couldn't tell you anything, so then I went anyway. I went to Texas for 2 weeks. I left on July 1st, and I returned on July 14th. Hang on a second. Okay, so what is this date here? We have July 1st to July 14th, 1963, when she went to Texas for 2 weeks to see Joyce in Beaumont. So Joyce Murret lives in Beaumont, Texas. This is fucking huge. This is fucking huge. This is the first we're hearing about the Murrets ever going to Texas ever. And remember, Lillian Murret had a Social Security action occur in Texas. I don't know what it was because it popped up on a site that I found, and it doesn't say anything other than Lillian Murret Social Security action. So she did something, whether make a claim or something in Texas, which is weird because she lived in New Orleans her entire life. This, Diana, this needs especially some more research. Joyce Murret in Beaumont, Texas, July 1st to July 14th, 1963. I have a feeling we're going to find some answers here. All right. So, no, my daughter in Beaumont, Joyce, that was on July 1st. Had Lee lost his job by that time? He must have. I didn't know it, but he must have been in between at that time. While you were away, he lost his job. It could have been in between that time, yes. Did he say anything to you about losing his job that you recall? No. It was long after time that he said anything to me about that. He didn't say anything to you for quite a while. No, he didn't say anything to me for about losing his job for a long time. And then Joyce came back. She had 2 adopted children. Okay, let me just stop and pause. We're going to probably wrap up here in a minute, but let me just stop and pause and analyze some of this stuff because so Diana Thomas has been harping on this fact to me that I've been still having trouble processing, that Joyce Murret and Ruth Payne look very much alike. Both of them seem to have 2 children. Ruth Payne has 2 children, and here we're finding out that Joyce Murret, who was living in Beaumont, Texas, has 2 adopted children. This is very much starting to ring like there's something here. There's some there, right? So let me see. We're going to finish this page, and then we're going to call it for the day. He didn't say anything to you for quite a while. No, he didn't say anything to me about losing his job for a long time. So then Joyce came back. She had adopted children, 2 adopted children. Joyce is your daughter who lived in Beaumont. Yes, you see, Joyce can't have any children, so she adopted 2 children. One is 4 and one is 5, but she got them when they were a month old, and they were really adorable. Now, Joyce hadn't seen Lee before, you see, or anything, and so then Lee and Marina came over one day while Joyce was at the house with the children. They had to come at about 9 o'clock in the morning and stayed till 9 or 10 o'clock that night. I was exhausted trying to entertain Marina, and not knowing how to speak Russian or make any other signs that she would understand and so forth. But she liked the dinner, and she wanted to know how to cook some of the things that I had, and Lee wrote the recipes down on paper for her. And I asked them how she could tell to pick out cans when she went to the store if she couldn't read English. And Lee said she could tell by the pictures on the cans what she wants, but I don't think Lee liked too much variety in food, just certain things. Did you say anything to her at the time or to Lee about the fact that she wasn't speaking English more than she evidenced? Yes, I asked Lee about that. I said, Lee, how does Marina like America? And he said to me, well, you can ask Marina yourself. So I started to talk to her. How do you like America? And she said, oh, I like America. She said, I like it. Now, we always did think it strange that Lee didn't seem to care whether Marina learned to speak English or not. She was always talking to her, and he was always talking to her in Russian, and we didn't know what was going on, you see. I asked him, why don't you teach Marina more English? But he didn't pick it up. So then in August, I think it was, I operated on for my ear, and during that time, Joyce was home. They had been at the house before the operation. They knew I was going to be, wait a minute, what month is this? In August, I think it was, I was operated. So in August, because they left, wait a minute. Okay, so they didn't leave until September, the week of September 24th. So we're covered. We got time here. They had been at the house before the operation. They knew I was going to be operated on, and he came up there to see me, which I thought was very nice. You mean Lee? Yes, I was at the time at the ear, nose, and throat hospital, and he said, how are you feeling? I said, all right. He stayed just a couple minutes, really, and he seemed to be nervous, like I thanked him for coming, and then he went off. So that night, Joyce came back to the hospital again. That was a Thursday, I think, and I got out on a Saturday, that following Saturday. So Mr. Murret was not there for my operation. He wanted to stay, but he was supposed to go to a retreat at Manresa, and he missed last year because he couldn't get off from work. So I said, well, don't miss this year because this isn't serious and there were no after effects. I said, go on to the retreat and it will be all right. So he went, and John, my son, was in town, and he came up, and of course, Joyce couldn't do too much because she had 2 children of her own to take care of. But anyway, I had the operation, and Joyce was to come up and get me on Saturday about 11 o'clock. And so then Lee called, and this was before Joyce left home to come up to the hospital. And he told Joyce that he was over at the parish jail or something, then went on Rampart over there. And he told her he wanted her to bring some money up and get him out there. And she said, Mother, I don't want to. She said she had been there twice with the money in her hand, and each time she came back out again. She told me, I don't know what to do. I said, well, Joyce, I know what he's in there for. Do you know? She told me he had talked to this officer up there, and she asked him what the kid is in there for before I bail him out. She was going to give the money to this officer to get Lee out, but the man told her not to be foolish and give her money up like that because she might not get it back. She said he told her, don't give up your cash because you may never get it back. He said, have somebody parole him. So Joyce didn't know what to do. She had been out of New Orleans a long time, so she didn't know what to do. This officer showed her the sign that they said Lee was carrying, and on it, it had Viva El Castro. So when Joyce saw that, she said, "Oh my God." She said, "I'm not about to get him out of there if he is like that." So she didn't know what to do, but she didn't give up her money. She said, here he was supposed to be looking out for a job, and he was doing these things like that, walking up and down Canal Street all day with signs and everything. This officer told her that he had told Lee, if you want to carry these Fair Play for Cuba signs around, you're going to have to rent yourself a hall and have your meetings in the hall, he said, but you can't carry signs like that out in the business district. The officer said that what he was doing wasn't so bad, but Joyce thought it was terrible, you see. So Joyce came out to the hospital. She didn't get him out of jail. She didn't give up her money. So when he got back home, it wasn't long until he called on the phone, and the first thing he did was kind of get rude with Joyce. She wanted to know how come she hadn't gotten him out yet and didn't have the money. And she said, no, I don't have any money. And she said that she had just gotten her mother out of the hospital and used up the money. And she told him, I don't have any money to get you out of there. Why am I feeling like suddenly Joyce is so much more involved in this case than I thought before? Also, Joyce had found out that he had been there since Friday. You see, Joyce was under the impression he had just gotten in jail. So Joyce asked him, how long you been here? And he said, I don't know how long I've been here. And Joyce said, I know, you've been here all night. And he said, well, just come out and get me out. And Joyce said, well, I don't know. I'll have to think things over. And then she said, I don't have any money. And then he said, well, I'll tell you what to do. He said, I want you to go to the apartment and see Marina because Marina has $70. And you tell Marina to get that money and come get me out. And Joyce said, well, I have to get mother into bed and I have no one to keep my 2 children while I run up there. And he said, well, ask one of your neighbors to mind the children. So in the meantime, Joyce told me what he had said. And I told her, well, I don't know. I don't like to exactly ask for favors from neighbors like that. So she said she didn't know what to do. So we talked about it a while. And we decided to call this man that we knew. And we called him and he told us what had happened. That Lee had had a fight with some Cubans and everything. And we were just still wondering about what Lee was doing in jail and everything. A little while after that, he called back and said everything was all right and that Lee was out. Now, we didn't see Lee, though. I guess he went on home. Then Mr. Murret came back from Manresa on Sunday evening or Sunday night, I believe it was. And when we told him about it, he was horrified. You know, he went right out to their apartment to talk to Lee and asked Lee in a fatherly way what he was doing, you know, so who was connected with and so forth, and whether he was with any commie group. And Lee said, no, he wasn't. And Mr. Murret told him, he said, you be sure you show up at that courthouse for the trial. And Lee said, don't worry, I'll show up. And he told Lee, said, you ought to get out and find yourself a job. You have a wife and a child and one coming and so forth. And then we didn't see Lee anymore until Labor Day, I believe it was. Lee called up that morning and said he and Marina wanted to come over that day and spend the day. And I said, not right away, but suppose they came over 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon because I think I was busy that morning or something. So they did. They came back on the bus and Mr. Murret happened to be passing by and he said he picked them up and brought them to the house, and I asked them if they had dinner, and he said yes, and I don't think they had. I told him I would go up to the store and get some rolls, and they could have had some coffee and rolls, so I did, and I made coffee, and we sat down and ate rolls, and to tell you the truth, I don't think they had eaten anything because they ate up all the rolls. I made hamburgers, too, that night, and they each ate 2 hamburgers. John was there, too, after they finished eating. It was time to take them home, and John brought them home. In his car. Yes, I might say, too, that Mr. Murret talked to Lee quite a bit about not trying to teach Marina how to speak English language. Okay, let me point something out here. So we're talking like we're in September of 1963 at this point, and this bitch is fucking fluent by April of 64 when she's testifying to the Warren Commission. Okay? So there's some shenanigans here. All right, let me finish the paragraph and then we'll wrap up. Yes, I might say that Mr. Murret talked to Lee quite a bit about him not trying to teach Marina how to speak English language. He said, Lee, we love Marina very much, but we feel very bad we can't converse with Marina because you speak to her all the time in Russian and we don't know what's going on and she doesn't know what's going on with us. Don't you think you should teach her English? Lee said, no. Then he said, I'll tell you right now, I will never teach it to her. And then he said, I don't care if she wants to learn, but she's not going to learn from me. He said, I'm not going to teach her because I don't want to lose my Russian. But he said he didn't object to her learning the English language, but at the same time, he kept talking in Russian to her. I asked him, why do you want to keep up your Russian, Lee? Do you intend to go back to Russia? But something happened right then. Somebody did something or other, and he never did answer that question. So all of that. So we brought them home. John brought them home in his car, but before he took them home, he drove them out and showed them the church and was going to be married in. And He also took them up to Palmer Avenue and showed them the house where he was going to have a reception with his girlfriend at her house. It's a large home on Palmer Avenue, so he took them and showed them all of that, and they took them home, and we didn't see them anymore. Is this the last time you saw either of them? Yes. All right, so we're going to stop right here, and we'll pick this up on the next show. So thanks for tuning in, everybody.